At Christmas dinner, my father stood up, clinked his crystal glass, and announced to the entire extended family, "We are officially done babysitting. No more free rides." I was holding my sleeping 4-year-old daughter Mia against my chest, while my 6-year-old son Leo pulled at my skirt. I looked up, the holiday music suddenly sounding far away. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shock. My father sneered, looking down at me from the head of the table. "You heard me. No more babysitting. No more fixing your broken sink. You are cut off. It is time you learned to survive without draining our resources." The room went dead silent. My mother and sister smirked. I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply packed my kids' coats, carried them out the front door, and drove away. The next morning, my phone blew up with 36 missed calls. I left a single comment on my sister's post, and the entire family turned on each other. My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. I work as a forensic accountant uncovering corporate fraud for a living. If you have ever been humiliated by the people who should love you the most, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear how I legally dismantled my toxic family. To understand how that explosive moment happened, I need to take you back exactly 1 hour before the dinner completely unraveled. It was Christmas Eve at the family estate in a wealthy suburb of Chicago. Growing up, this massive Tudor-style mansion was meant to project an image of untouchable old money. My father, Richard, was a 62-year-old real estate developer who built his entire personality around his supposed wealth. He demanded absolute loyalty and submission from everyone. I arrived at the estate exhausted. I had just finished a punishing 60-hour work week digging through fraudulent financial records for a major corporate client. As a single mother raising 2 young kids, my life was a constant juggling act of spreadsheets, school drop-offs, and endless exhaustion. I loved my children fiercely, but doing it alone left me drained. I drove a reliable older sedan, wore practical clothes, and prioritized my kids' college funds over designer handbags. My mother, Diane, who was 60, met me at the door. She did not hug me or wish me a Merry Christmas. Instead, her eyes scanned my simple wool coat and sensible boots. "Naomi, you wore that same outfit to Thanksgiving," she sighed, adjusting her diamond necklace. "You cannot expect to find a wealthy man to take care of you and those kids if you always look so modest." I bit my tongue and ushered Leo and Mia inside. For my entire life, Diane had been my father's biggest enabler, obsessed with social climbing and devoid of maternal warmth. While I settled the kids in the living room, the front door swung open to reveal the stars of the family. My younger sister Beatrice, who we all called Bea, made her grand entrance. Bea was 31 and the undisputed golden child. She marketed herself as a highly successful lifestyle blogger and luxury influencer, posting endless photos of designer clothes, expensive vacations, and 5-star meals. She was loud, entitled, and completely allergic to actual hard work. Right beside her was her husband, Jamal. He was a 33-year-old investment broker, a hard-working African-American man who had grown up in a blue-collar household. Jamal had built a decent career, but since marrying Bea, he had become obsessed with matching my father's old money aesthetic. He wore a custom-tailored suit and sported a flashy luxury watch, trying desperately to fit into the wealthy image my father projected. I always felt a twinge of pity for Jamal. He was blinded by the glamorous facade, unaware of the toxic rot beneath the surface. "Merry Christmas, peasants," Bea announced, tossing her fur coat aside. She strutted into the living room, barely glancing at my children. "Jamal just closed a huge account. We are absolutely exhausted from carrying the local economy." Jamal puffed out his chest, accepting a glass of bourbon from my father. "Just doing my best to keep up with the family legacy, Richard," Jamal said eagerly. My father clapped him on the back, laughing loudly. "That is what I like to hear. Men who know how to generate real wealth. Not everyone understands the value of hard work." He shot a pointed look directly at me. I focused on cutting a piece of ham for Leo, ignoring the blatant insult. Bee and Jamal were celebrated as the successful future of the family, while I was treated as the pathetic charity case who only came around for free meals. Whenever I had a late-night audit, I would drop the kids off at the estate for a few hours. I always made sure to fix their leaky faucets, troubleshoot their computers, and handle their tax filings for free in return. But in their eyes, I was just a leech. We all moved to the grand dining room. The table was set with crystal and fine china. The tension in the air was thick, heavy with the unspoken resentments that defined our family gatherings. I kept my head down, helping Mia with her food, counting the minutes until I could pack up and take my kids back to our safe apartment. Then my father tapped his silver knife against his crystal wine glass. The ringing sound cut through the chatter. He stood up at the head of the table, a calculated smile spreading across his face. "If I could have everyone's attention," Richard commanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I have a very important grand Christmas announcement to make regarding the future of this family and this estate." My father stood there perfectly poised, relishing the attention. He loved an audience, and tonight he had captive listeners hanging on his every word. He began by thanking everyone for coming, his voice dripping with faux humility. Then his tone shifted. It became sharp-pointed and directed entirely at me. He started talking about responsibility, about pulling one's weight, about what it means to be a contributing member of a family. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that this was not a speech about family unity. It was a public execution of my character. He looked right at me, his eyes cold. He said he and my mother were tired of the constant demands I placed on them. He called me a drain on their time and energy. He claimed I used them as a free babysitting service and a 24-hour handyman. He made it sound like dropping my kids off for a few hours while I worked late was an unbearable burden, completely ignoring the fact that I spent hours fixing their computer issues, reviewing their taxes, and managing their endless stream of petty grievances. The room grew uncomfortably silent. My aunts and uncles exchanged nervous glances. Even Bee and Jamal looked momentarily surprised by the sheer hostility radiating from him. But Richard was not finished. He turned his attention to Bee and Jamal, his expression softening into a picture of parental pride. He praised their drive, their ambition, and their supposed success. He called them the true successors of his real estate legacy, the ones who truly understood how to build and maintain wealth. Jamal puffed his chest out slightly, clearly enjoying the validation, while Bee beamed her phone, likely recording the entire speech for her followers. Then came the grand finale. Richard raised his glass higher. "Diane and I have been thinking about the future," he announced, his voice booming. "About legacy. About ensuring that this estate, a symbol of our hard work, remains in capable hands. And so, as a gift for their upcoming baby, Diane and I are signing the deed of this estate over to Bee and Jamal. It belongs to those who generate actual wealth." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Bee shrieked with delight, throwing her arms around Jamal, who looked stunned but thrilled. My mother Diane clapped her hands, tears of joy welling in her eyes as she looked at her golden child. The rest of the family murmured their congratulations, though some glances darted my way, assessing my reaction. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the kind that starts in your stomach and rises to your throat. But I forced it down. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I looked at my father, who was watching me with a triumphant smirk, expecting tears, expecting a scene, expecting me to beg for crumbs. I did none of those things. Bee detached herself from Jamal and turned to me, her smile a mix of pity and gloating. "Oh, Naomi, do not be sad," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You can still come visit. We might even let you host a barbecue in the backyard once in a while, if you ask nicely." My mother chimed in, her tone equally condescending. "This should be a wake-up call for you, Naomi. Use this as motivation. Maybe if you put a little more effort into your appearance, you could find a rich man to take care of you too. It is not too late to turn things around." The sheer audacity of their comments was almost breathtaking. They were standing in a house I had saved, judging me for a life I had built with my own two hands, while praising a lifestyle funded by credit cards and lies. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. The anger was there, but it was buried under a thick layer of icy resolve. I looked directly at my father. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I simply asked, "Are you absolutely sure you want to sign this house over to them, Dad?" Richard scoffed, clearly mistaking my calm for defeat. "Jealousy does not suit you, Naomi. Yes, I am sure. It is a done deal. The paperwork is being drawn up as we speak." He took a sip of his wine, dismissing me entirely. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have a celebration to enjoy. You can stay for dessert if you promise not to ruin the mood." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I turned to my children who were watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. "Come on, guys," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It is time to go." I helped Leo into his coat and picked up Mia, wrapping her small arms around my neck. I didn't look back as I walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer and out the heavy oak front doors. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't shed a single tear. The cold night air hit my face, shocking me into sharp focus. I strapped the kids into their car seats, making sure they were warm and secure. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing us inside the quiet sanctuary of my old sedan. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands perfectly steady. The engine hummed to life, a low, reliable sound that grounded me. I glanced at the imposing silhouette of the estate in the rearview mirror, its windows blazing with light, filled with people celebrating a lie. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put me in my place, cementing my role as the family failure. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel. The drive home was quiet, save for the soft breathing of my children in the back seat. My mind was racing, calculating, strategizing. I had spent years protecting them, hiding their failures, absorbing their abuse. That ended tonight. They wanted to play a game of real estate and legacy fine. I would show them exactly who held all the cards. I was not just a forensic accountant. I was the owner of the board they were playing on. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of dark asphalt illuminated only by the rhythmic passing of amber streetlights. The heater in my older sedan hummed a steady, comforting tune, blending with the soft, synchronized breathing of Leo and Mia, fast asleep in the back seat. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel. I was not crying. I was not shaking. My forensic accountant brain, trained to remain entirely detached when dissecting financial catastrophes, had already taken over. Suddenly, the screen of my phone mounted on the dashboard lit up the dark cabin. A text message notification chimed. It was from Jamal. I kept my eyes on the road, waiting for a stoplight before tapping the screen to read it. The message was long, dripping with the arrogant, condescending tone of a man who believed he had just leveled up in the world. "Don't be bitter about tonight, Naomi. B really needs this house for her brand to secure those high-tier sponsorships. It is just business. You have to understand that. Tell you what, maybe I can set you up with one of my mid-level clients so you can finally afford a better place for you and the kids. You really need to upgrade your lifestyle." I let out a short, hollow laugh. Jamal was playing the benevolent, wealthy brother-in-law, offering me crumbs from a table he did not even own. He was a smart broker, a man who clawed his way up from a working-class background, but his fatal flaw was his desperate need for Richard's validation. He was completely blinded by the illusion of my family's wealth. I saw an opening, a massive, glaring liability. I pressed the microphone icon on my steering wheel, using the voice-to-text feature to lay my trap carefully. "I am not bitter at all, Jamal. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly for your sake. Did Dad actually give you the physical deed yet?" I sent the message and merged onto the freeway, my fingers tapping a slow, calculated rhythm against the steering wheel. I knew my father. He was a master of the stall, a man who sold empty air wrapped in expensive paper. I just needed to know how deep Jamal had waded into the swamp. 2 minutes later, the phone chimed again. Jamal's reply sealed his fate. "We are signing the transfer next week. Dad is getting all the official paperwork drawn up right now. I am actually leveraging the property immediately for a massive commercial loan to expand my brokerage firm. The equity in that estate is exactly what I need for collateral." My blood ran ice cold. Jamal was not just bragging, he was marching straight into a federal crime. He was planning to use a forged or non-existent deed to secure a massive commercial bank loan. Richard was setting him up as the perfect fall guy to extract cash from an asset that did not exist. The dominoes were lined up so perfectly it was almost poetic. I arrived at my apartment complex, parked the car, and carried my sleeping children inside one by one. I tucked Leo into his bed, pulling the superhero blanket up to his chin. I laid Mia in her crib, kissing her forehead. The apartment was modest, quiet, and absolutely safe. There were no crystal chandeliers or imported marble floors, but every single item within these walls belonged to me. I walked down the short hallway into my home office and locked the door behind me. I knelt in front of the heavy fireproof safe tucked beneath my desk. I punched in the digital code, turned the steel handle, and pulled the heavy door open. I reached past the emergency cache and the kids' birth certificates, pulling out a thick, legal-sized folder stamped with bold red ink. The label read, Oakwood Holdings, LLC. I spread the documents across my desk, the harsh light of my desk lamp illuminating the truth my family had buried. I traced my finger over the official county-stamped deed. The purchase date was exactly 5 years ago. Underneath the deed was a copy of a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing, bearing my father's unmistakable, arrogant signature. 5 years ago, Richard's real estate empire had completely collapsed under a mountain of bad commercial bets and toxic debt. He had faced public foreclosure, total asset liquidation, and the ultimate destruction of his precious social standing. To save my parents from the humiliation of homelessness, I stepped in. Using my financial expertise, I purchased the estate through a newly formed LLC to keep my name off the public radar. I drafted a strict $0 lease agreement. I allowed them to live in the mansion rent-free. I let Richard continue hosting his lavish holiday parties, smoking his expensive cigars, and pretending he was still a titan of industry just to save his fragile ego. The single non-negotiable condition of this arrangement was simple. They would occasionally help watch Leo and Mia while I worked the grueling 80-hour weeks, required to pay the massive mortgage on a mansion I did not even live in. They had just broken the one condition keeping a roof over their heads. Richard had stood in my dining room, drank wine paid for by my sweat, and told me I was cut off. Worse, he was trying to gift my sister a property he had not legally owned in half a decade. I sat down at my computer and woke up the monitors. I typed my credentials into my secure property management portal. The dashboard loaded, displaying the active tenant agreement for Richard and Diane. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. I hovered my mouse over the management options menu and clicked on the red button labeled Terminate Rent-Free Agreement. A confirmation box popped up on the screen asking for the next administrative action. I selected Initiate 30-day eviction notice and pressed Enter. The system flashed green, confirming the automated legal process had begun. The clock was officially ticking. The sunlight streaming through the blinds was bright, casting long shadows across the living room floor. It was Christmas morning. For the first time in years, I had not spent the early hours of the holiday rushing over to the family estate to prepare breakfast for people who despised me. Instead, I woke up in my own bed, wrapped in a warm quilt, listening to the soft giggles of Leo and Mia coming from the hallway. They were trying to be quiet, sneaking peeks at the small pile of wrapped gifts under our modest artificial tree. I smiled, tying my robe and stepping out to greet them. The joy on their faces was genuine, untainted by the heavy, suffocating expectations that always ruined the holidays at my parents' house. We spent the next 2 hours opening presents. There were no designer clothes or expensive gadgets. Leo got the building blocks he had been begging for, and Mia received a doctor playset. They were thrilled. I went into the kitchen and started making pancakes, letting them mix the batter and spill flour on the counter. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the apartment, creating a sense of peace I had desperately needed. I deliberately left my phone charging on my nightstand the entire time. I wanted this morning to belong exclusively to us, free from the toxic gravitational pull of Richard, Diane, and Beatrice. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I finally poured myself a second cup of coffee and walked into the bedroom to check my notifications. I tapped the screen, watching it light up. A wave of red notification badges flooded the display. 36 missed calls. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. 14 of those calls were from Richard, 12 were from Diane, 10 were from B. Along with the calls were dozens of frantic text messages, most of them sent between 2 and 4 in the morning. The automated system from my property management portal operates in real time. The moment I hit that button last night, an official email notification was dispatched directly to Richard and Diane's inboxes, informing them that their $0 lease agreement had been formally terminated and a 30-day eviction notice had been initiated. They had clearly seen the email. The panic in their text messages was palpable, shifting wildly from aggressive demands to confused bargaining. Richard had texted demanding I answer the phone immediately, claiming the property portal must have been hacked by a cyber criminal. Diane had sent a barrage of messages accusing me of playing a sick, vindictive prank to ruin their Christmas. B had simply texted a string of question marks, followed by a demand to know why her parents were screaming in the hallway. I did not respond to a single one of them. I swiped the notifications away, clearing my screen. Instead of returning their calls, I opened the Instagram app. I knew my sister better than anyone. B operated on a strict schedule of social media validation, and no amount of midnight family panic would stop her from capitalizing on a prime holiday posting window. Sure enough, her face was the first thing to pop up on my feed. She had uploaded a carousel of professionally shot photos, clearly taken weeks in advance just for this occasion. In the main image, B and Jamal were standing on the grand sweeping staircase of my estate. B was wearing a custom silk gown that hugged her growing pregnancy bump, while Jamal looked sharp in a tailored velvet tuxedo. They were gazing lovingly at each other, holding matching crystal champagne flutes. The caption beneath the photo was a masterpiece of absolute, unadulterated delusion. It read, "Christmas Miracle. Mom and Dad just gifted us the family estate. Words cannot express how blessed we feel to inherit this incredible piece of generational wealth. Building an empire takes sacrifice, but hard work truly pays off. We cannot wait to raise our baby in the halls where our family legacy was built. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Hashtag self-made, hashtag homeowner, hashtag luxury life, hashtag generational wealth, hashtag blessed." The post had already racked up 50,000 likes in just a few hours. I scrolled down to the comments section, watching the fake congratulations roll in from other influencers and lifestyle bloggers. But what caught my forensic accountant eye were the comments from Jamal's professional network. Several high-net-worth investment clients had commented praising Jamal for securing such a massive, prestigious asset. They were validating his status, congratulating him on entering the upper echelon of real estate ownership. Jamal had replied to a few of them using the monkey covering its eyes emoji and typing out humble brags about expanding his investment portfolio now that he had secured such a prime piece of collateral. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Richard and Diane had promised them a house they did not own. B was using my property to farm likes and sponsorships from brands who thought she was a wealthy heiress. Jamal was using the illusion of this massive asset to leverage his reputation with rich clients. They were all standing on a trapdoor, completely unaware that I held the lever. I read through the comments one more time, marveling at how easily they lied to the world and to themselves. They had spent years tearing me down, calling me a failure, treating me like a peasant in my own home, all while funding their extravagant masquerade with my hard-earned money. I walked back into the kitchen, leaning against the counter as I watched Leo and Mia building a tall tower out of colorful blocks. They were happy, safe, and entirely secure. I looked back down at the glowing screen of my smartphone device. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time to introduce a little financial reality into my sister's perfectly curated fantasy world. I cracked my knuckles, tapped the reply button under Beatrice's post, and began typing one public comment now. I carefully formulated the exact phrasing required to dismantle this charade without sounding bitter. Facts were always my sharpest weapon against their endless emotional manipulation and gaslighting tactics. I typed out the response slowly and methodically, ensuring every single word carried absolute legal and financial weight. Congratulations on moving in, B. Since Dad gifted you the place, I assume you and Jamal will be taking over the $6,500 per month rent. I am the sole owner of Oakwood Holdings, LLC, the legal owner of this property. You can verify this on the County Assessor public portal. Official eviction notices for Mom and Dad will be legally served by the county sheriff on Tuesday morning. I read the text twice. It was perfect. Cold, undeniable, and entirely verifiable. I pressed send. I watched as my comment materialized directly beneath a sea of artificial praise from Jamal's high-net-worth clients. It sat there like a lit stick of dynamite in a crowded room. I knew B was likely still asleep, sleeping off the expensive champagne she had consumed the night before, completely oblivious to the digital catastrophe unfolding on her perfectly curated page. I could vividly imagine the exact moment she would wake up. She would reach for her phone, eager to bask in the validation of her followers, only to find her entire brand burning to the ground. Jamal would experience the same horrifying realization when his phone vibrated with my name attached to a bombshell about his supposed commercial loan collateral. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, taking a deep breath. I wanted to make sure there were zero loopholes in my statement. The County Assessor Portal is a free public database available to anyone. It allows people to look up property tax records and registered agents. When I formed Oakwood Holdings LLC 5 years ago, I registered it in a way that led directly back to my professional credentials as a forensic accountant. I did this deliberately to protect the asset, making it absolutely impossible for Richard to ever claim the property was the result of a misunderstanding or a verbal family agreement. The paper trail was flawless. Furthermore, I wanted to detail the exact nature of the $6,500 monthly rent. This was not an arbitrary number I invented to sound vindictive. It was the precise fair market value for a sprawling Tudor-style mansion in that specific upscale Chicago suburb. I had waived this amount for 60 consecutive months in exchange for their basic parental decency, a contract they breached the night before. By stating the rent publicly, I was stripping away their facade of immense wealth and replacing it with the cold, hard reality of their financial dependency. I did not delete the comment. I did not edit it. I let it stand as a monument to their breathtaking hubris. I closed the Instagram application completely. I navigated into my phone settings and switched on the Do Not Disturb feature, blocking all incoming alerts. I placed the device face down on the kitchen counter, severing my connection to their inevitable panic. "All right, Leo Mia," I called out cheerfully, grabbing a cloth and wiping down the flour-covered counters. "Who wants to get dressed and go to the park?" They cheered loudly, instantly, abandoning their new wooden blocks and running excitedly toward the hallway to grab their heavy coats. We spent the next 4 uninterrupted hours at the quiet neighborhood playground down the street. I pushed Mia high on the swings, played a breathless game of tag with Leo across the frosty grass, and deeply breathed the crisp winter air. I was completely disconnected from the digital world, entirely present with my children, enjoying a peaceful Christmas afternoon that my parents could no longer ruin. Meanwhile, the internet was doing exactly what the internet does best. B had built a lucrative brand on authenticity and luxury, inviting hundreds of thousands of strangers to scrutinize and envy her daily life. Those same strangers were now reading my comment, and the backlash was both immediate and entirely ruthless. Within minutes, digital sleuths navigated away from Instagram and went straight to the county property records website. They aggressively pulled the official deed history for the massive estate. They found Oakwood Holdings, LLC. They successfully verified my complete ownership status, just as I had instructed them to do. High-resolution screenshots of my comment were rapidly captured, widely circulated, and fiercely dissected across multiple major social media platforms. Discussion threads popped up on Reddit analyzing the sudden downfall of a fake influencer. Independent TikTok creators began making viral reaction videos pointing out the massive hypocrisy of her self-made millionaire act while she was actually living rent-free in her older sister's house. B was permanently exposed as a complete, undeniable fraud to her entire loyal audience. The fake generational wealth narrative she had pushed so aggressively collapsed, instantly replaced forever by the highly humiliating truth of her deeply parasitic lifestyle. We returned to the apartment just as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow through the living room windows. I unlocked the door, helped the kids out of their heavy winter coats, and directed them to the sofa to watch a holiday movie with some hot cocoa. I walked slowly back into the quiet kitchen and picked up my phone from the counter. The screen was a solid wall of notifications, far beyond the initial 36 missed calls. It was a digital avalanche of sheer panic from my family. But before I could even unlock the device to survey the carnage, a sharp, frantic knock echoed through my apartment. It was heavy, urgent, and loud enough to make me jump. I walked quickly to the front door and checked the security peephole. It was not Richard. It was not Diane. It was not B or Jamal. It was a delivery courier wearing a standard brown corporate uniform holding a digital signature pad and an urgent legal certified letter. I stepped back from the peephole. I had no intention of dealing with whatever legal threat or desperate correspondence my father had expedited to my apartment on Christmas Day. Let him waste his money on courier fees. I turned my back to the heavy wooden door and walked away, letting the frantic knocking echo through the narrow hallway until it finally ceased. The courier eventually gave up his heavy boots, retreating down the exterior stairwell. I exhaled a slow breath, feeling the absolute control I possessed over my own environment. But the silence did not last. Before I could return to the living room to join my children, my smartphone illuminated on the kitchen counter. It was vibrating violently against the granite surface. The incoming caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I rarely answered unlisted calls, but my forensic intuition urged me to pick it up. I swiped the green icon and brought the device to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I just waited. The sound that greeted me was not anger or threats. It was the sound of a man drowning. I heard ragged, shallow gasps for air followed by a wet, desperate cough. It was Jamal. His usual arrogant finance bro persona, the one that bragged about carrying the local economy and generating immense wealth, was entirely gone. He was hyperventilating so severely I thought he might pass out over the cellular connection. Naomi. He finally choked out, his voice barely a terrified whisper. Naomi, please. You have to tell me that comment was a sick joke. You have to tell me you were just angry about last night and wanted to scare us, please. I leaned against the cool refrigerator door. I pictured Jamal pacing in whatever room he had locked himself inside, at the estate, his custom velvet tuxedo likely discarded on the floor, his slick confidence completely evaporated. He was a smart man who had let his desperate need for my father's validation blind him to the most basic rules of due diligence. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a ledger balancing itself. I do not joke about real estate, Jamal. I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Every single word I typed under your wife's post is a verified, legally binding fact. I own Oakwood Holdings. Oakwood Holdings owns the estate. Richard and Diane have been my charity tenants for 5 years, and I am formally evicting them. A ragged sob broke through the receiver. It was a visceral sound of absolute devastation. Jamal was a seasoned investment broker. He understood financial ruin better than anyone in my family. He knew how to read the writing on the wall, and right now that writing was spelling out his total destruction. The facade he had bought into was collapsing, and the debris was crushing him. Naomi, you do not understand what is happening. Jamal stammered his words, stumbling over each other in sheer panic. You do not understand what your father did. He gave me the paperwork. He handed it to me in his study. He poured me a glass of scotch, shook my hand, and gave me the physical paperwork. I closed my eyes, piecing the puzzle together. Richard had always been a master manipulator, but this level of deceit required a specific kind of brazen criminality. What exactly did he give you, Jamal? I asked, my tone shifting into an interrogation. Tell me exactly what you are holding in your hands right now. A deed, Jamal cried out, the desperation tearing his voice apart. He gave me a deed. It has my name on it. It has B's name on it. It has the official county seal stamped right on the front page. He told me it was a clean transfer. He told me the house was free and clear of any encumbrances. He said it was his ultimate gift to us for the new baby and to help me grow my firm. I pressed my fingers against my temple. Richard had not just lied, he had manufactured a high-quality forgery. He had fabricated a legal document complete with counterfeit municipal seals to convince his son-in-law that he was inheriting a multi-million-dollar asset. And what did you do with this forged document, Jamal? I asked, though my forensic accountant brain already knew the horrifying answer. I knew the aggressive tactics of investment brokers looking to expand their portfolios quickly. Jamal let out a sound that was half laugh, half wail. I leveraged it. He confessed the truth, finally spilling out into the open. I took it straight to my commercial lenders last week. I used it to personally guarantee and secure a $500,000 bridge loan for my investment firm. We closed the funding on Friday afternoon. The money is already sitting in my corporate account. The sheer magnitude of his error hung heavily in the digital space between us. Jamal had bypassed standard title searches, likely using his industry connections and the immense perceived prestige of my father's name to push the underwriting process through at lightning speed. He had staked his entire professional reputation, his firm, and his personal freedom on a piece of paper printed in my father's home office. He had blindly trusted a man who had been secretly bankrupt for 5 years. Jamal's ragged breathing slowed, replaced by a chilling, hollow realization. The adrenaline of his panic was fading, leaving only the icy dread of his impending reality. He was no longer just a victim of a cruel family lie. He was an active participant in a massive financial crime. The heavy silence on the phone was absolute, broken only by his quiet breathing. Naomi. Jamal finally whispered, his deep voice trembling with the crushing weight of his fatal error. If the commercial bank finds out that the deed is completely fake, I am definitely going to federal prison. I listened to the terror vibrating through Jamal's voice and felt profound detachment. He tied his livelihood to a man whose only real asset was an illusion. I told Jamal to retain a criminal defense attorney immediately, to not speak to my father, and to document every single interaction they had shared regarding that fraudulent deed. Then I ended the call. There is absolutely no room for sympathy in a forensic audit. My focus returned to the digital battlefield. I refreshed my social media feed, noticing B's glamorous announcement photo had vanished. She deleted the original post in sheer panic after Jamal informed her of the impending legal apocalypse. However, the internet never forgets. Deleting the post was like trying to put smoke back into a burning building. Thousands of screenshots were already circulating across various platforms, permanently immortalizing her arrogant declaration. But B was nothing if not a professional manipulator. Realizing she could not erase the public record of my ownership, she decided to control the narrative by entirely rewriting reality. A notification popped up on my screen indicating that Beatrice was broadcasting live to her followers. I tapped the alert and watched my younger sister execute the performance of a lifetime. She was sitting on the floor of her extravagant closet, wearing an oversized sweater to emphasize her pregnancy, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She was sobbing hysterically, gasping for air, clutching a crumpled tissue. It was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. She stared directly into the camera lens and began spinning a vicious, elaborate lie to save her crumbling brand. She told her massive audience that her family was currently living through a private nightmare. She claimed that I, her older sister, had been suffering from severe mental health issues and dangerous delusions for years. According to B, my jealousy over her success and her happy marriage had finally pushed me over the edge into a complete psychological breakdown. But the lies did not stop at character assassination. She needed to explain away the county property records. With a straight face while wiping away imaginary tears, B told her followers that because I worked as a forensic accountant, I possessed high-level computer skills. She explicitly accused me of illegally hacking into the county assessor database to fraudulently change the name on the property deed from my parents' names to my own shell company. She cried that my parents were terrified of my erratic behavior. She painted me as a dangerous, unstable cybercriminal who was trying to steal the family home out from under a pregnant woman just to ruin their Christmas. Her loyal followers were eating it up, flooding the live chat with messages of support, prayers, and outrage directed squarely at me. She was desperately trying to save her sponsorships by turning me into a cartoon villain. It was a spectacular display of defamation, and I calmly used the screen recording feature on my phone to capture every single slanderous accusation she broadcasted. This footage would be a beautiful addition to the upcoming civil suit. The tranquility of my apartment was suddenly shattered by a violent booming sound. Someone was pounding on my front door with enough force to rattle the hinges. I quickly muted the video on my phone and walked quietly down the hallway, ensuring Leo and Mia were still safely occupied in the living room with their movie. The pounding escalated into heavy, aggressive kicking. "Open this door right now, Naomi!" the voice roaring through the hallway commanded. It belonged to Richard. He had driven straight from his crumbling estate to my apartment complex. His tone was not just angry, it was completely unhinged. The polite, refined mask of the wealthy patriarch had been ripped away, leaving only a desperate, cornered animal in its place. "I know you are in there," Richard screamed, his fists hammering against the solid wood. "You think you can pull a stunt like this and get away with it? We have lived in that house for 5 years. We have adverse possession. We have squatters' rights. You cannot just throw us out on the street." He was hurling legal terms he clearly did not understand, grasping at any concept that might save him from the eviction notice he had just received. When the pounding did not force me to open the door, his tactics shifted from legal threats to vicious intimidation. "I will destroy you for this!" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing loudly enough for my neighbors to hear. "I will sue you for elder abuse. I will tell the judge you are trying to extort your own aging parents. I will take those kids away from you, Naomi. You will never work in this city again once I am finished with you. Open the door." His threats of taking my children caused a cold fury to ignite in my chest, but my discipline held firm. Engaging with a narcissist, experiencing a narcissistic collapse, is a tactical error. I did not unlock the deadbolt. I did not raise my voice to argue with him through the wood. I did not even tell him to leave. Instead, I opened the security application on my smartphone and accessed the live feed from the camera mounted directly outside my front door. The high-definition video displayed Richard, red-faced, sweating and screaming violently in the hallway. I stepped close to the door, remaining entirely silent. I raised my hand and tapped my fingernails sharply against the glass peephole right where the camera lens was pointing. I wanted him to hear that tap. I wanted him to look directly into the small black lens and realize that every single threat, every curse word, and every unhinged demand was currently being recorded in crystal clear audio and video, building an impenetrable case against him. He was no longer a wealthy landlord demanding respect from his daughter. He was just a trespassing criminal, documenting his own downfall for the local police. I stepped away from the heavy wooden door, the sound of my father's fists continuing to hammer against the frame. His voice had degraded from authoritative commands into a barrage of incoherent, frantic obscenities. He was completely out of control, a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of power, now publicly unraveling in the hallway of a modest apartment complex. I did not engage. I simply picked up my smartphone, dialed 911, and brought the receiver to my ear. When the dispatcher answered, my voice was steady, clinically precise, and entirely devoid of panic. I reported that a violent, unhinged individual was currently attempting to break down my front door, shouting aggressive threats and terrifying my two young children who were inside the residence. I provided my exact address and apartment number. I stated he was a relative but emphasized he was trespassing hostile and I feared for my safety. Outside my door, the commotion was beginning to attract an audience. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I watched as several of my neighbors cautiously opened their doors, peering out into the corridor to witness the spectacle. Richard noticed them, but his narcissistic rage only escalated. He began shouting at my neighbors, ordering them to mind their own business, claiming he was a wealthy property owner dealing with a psychotic, ungrateful daughter. He was digging his own grave, providing a dozen independent witnesses to his disturbing the peace. Within 7 minutes, the wail of approaching sirens echoed down the street. The heavy footsteps of 2 uniformed police officers thundered up the exterior stairwell. They arrived on my floor, flanking Richard. Realizing the police were there, my father instantly attempted to pivot back into his polished persona. He straightened his posture, plastered on a fake smile, and tried to explain this was a simple family misunderstanding. He told the officers that I was having a mental breakdown and he was just a concerned father trying to check on his grandchildren. That was my cue. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I stood there perfectly composed, a stark contrast to my father's sweating, red-faced frenzy. I did not look at him. I addressed the officers directly. I handed them my license to verify my identity, followed by a printed copy of the Oakwood Holdings LLC deed. This established I was the sole legal owner of the estate he was claiming, proving his narrative was entirely fabricated. Finally, I held up my smartphone and played the high-definition Ring camera footage. The officers watched the screen display Richard kicking my door, threatening to take my children, and screaming obscenities. The digital evidence completely dismantled his lies. The officers turned back to Richard. Their expressions had shifted from cautious inquiry to absolute intolerance. They informed him that he was officially trespassing, disturbing the peace, and acting in a threatening manner. They ordered him to leave the premises immediately. Richard, completely incapable of accepting defeat, made the worst possible tactical error. He raised his voice at the officers. He demanded to know their badge numbers. He bragged about the influential politicians he knew and threatened to have them fired for disrespecting a man of his stature. The officers did not hesitate. One of them grabbed Richard by the arm, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the corridor wall. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping around my father's wrists echoed loudly in the hallway. The humiliation was absolute and total. Richard, the man who demanded tailored suits and fine dining, the man who looked down on anyone who actually worked for a living, was now being perp-walked down the stairs of my apartment building like a common criminal. The neighbors he had just insulted stood in their doorways watching him get dragged away in disgrace. I followed the officers down the stairwell and out into the frigid winter air, my coat wrapped tightly around my shoulders. I watched as they marched him toward the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser parked along the curb. Before the officer could press his hand down on my father's head to force him into the back of the squad car, I stepped forward. I politely asked the officer if I could hand the suspect a legally mandated document. The officer, having just reviewed my flawless evidence upstairs, nodded and gave me a few seconds. I walked right up to my father. His eyes were wild, darting around in sheer panic, completely stripped of his lifelong arrogance. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a crisp, folded piece of paper. It was the official notarized 30-day eviction notice. I reached out and smoothly slid the document directly into the breast pocket of his expensive custom-tailored suit jacket. I leaned in close, ensuring my voice was low enough that only he could hear my final parting message. I told him Merry Christmas, and that he had exactly 30 days to pack up his illusions and get out of my house. I stepped back, signaling to the officer that I was finished. The police shoved him into the back seat, slammed the heavy door shut, and drove away, the siren blaring into the quiet holiday afternoon. I stood on the cold concrete sidewalk watching the flashing red and blue taillights slowly disappear around the dark corner of the avenue. The immediate physical threat to my family was permanently neutralized, and the legal eviction paperwork was officially served exactly as I had meticulously planned. I pulled my coat tighter against the biting winter wind, and walked calmly back into the safety of my building. However, the very moment I finally stepped inside the warm sanctuary of my quiet apartment, my phone vibrated aggressively in my front pocket. I pulled it out expecting a follow-up from Jamal. Instead, it was a sudden alert from Facebook. Diane had just posted a devastating 2,000-word essay. I stared at the notification on my screen. The author of the post was my own mother. She had tagged dozens of extended family members, local community leaders, and even some of my professional contacts she had gathered over the years. I tapped the alert, and the massive block of text loaded onto my high-resolution display. It was a calculated, venomous masterpiece of public manipulation. Diane had clearly spent the last hour drafting a fictitious tragedy, positioning herself as a heartbroken, terrified grandmother, desperately trying to save her grandchildren from a monster. The post began with a theatrical plea for prayers. Diane claimed that our family was enduring an unimaginable crisis because her eldest daughter had suffered a complete psychological collapse. She painted a picture of me as a deeply disturbed, unstable woman who was entirely unfit to raise children. But she did not stop at calling me crazy. She escalated the lies into a direct attack on my role as a mother to Leo and Mia. According to her horrific essay, I was a severely neglectful and abusive parent. She fabricated elaborate stories about arriving at my apartment to find my children locked in dirty rooms while I was out partying. She wrote that my modest lifestyle was not a choice, but the result of me squandering every penny I earned on selfish, reckless behavior. She explicitly stated that I regularly left my 4-year-old daughter and 6-year-old son completely alone in a filthy, unsafe apartment in the middle of the night so I could go on dates with random men. She described my home as a hazardous environment unfit for human habitation, full of garbage, rotting food, and empty bottles scattered across the floor. The most damaging lie, the one clearly designed to destroy my professional reputation as a forensic accountant, was her explanation for the estate ownership. Diane wrote a completely fabricated financial history. She claimed that 5 years ago she and Richard had generously set aside massive college trust funds for Leo and Mia to ensure their bright futures. She then accused me of illegally draining my own children's educational accounts to secretly purchase the Oakwood Holdings property. She told her thousands of Facebook friends that I had stolen my baby's futures to fund a psychotic vendetta against the grandparents who were only trying to protect them. She spun a dramatic narrative that portrayed her and my father as the ultimate victims of financial elder abuse, crying about how they were being thrown out into the cold winter streets. She concluded the long essay with a dramatic declaration that she and Richard would not rest until they rescued Leo and Mia from my toxic, abusive custody. The comments section was already exploding with activity. People who had known me since childhood were expressing shock and absolute horror. Complete strangers were calling for my immediate arrest. Extended relatives were demanding that someone intervene right away to save the children. Diane was actively inciting a digital mob against me, weaponizing public outrage to punish me for the eviction notice I had just slid into her husband's pocket. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew these severe allegations could trigger devastating real-world consequences for a working single mother. As I read the final paragraph of her post, the cold clinical detachment that had fueled my actions all day completely evaporated. My stoic, calculated demeanor shattered into 1,000 pieces. Evicting my parents from a mansion they did not own was a purely financial decision. It was a direct consequence of their arrogance and their breach of our quiet agreement. But this was entirely different. Coming after my children, attacking my fitness as a mother, and publicly accusing me of severe child neglect, crossed the absolute point of no return. A hot, blinding fury ignited deep in my chest, replacing the icy calm I had maintained since the Christmas dinner. I had spent my entire adult life protecting Leo and Mia from the toxic poison of my family. I worked grueling hours to ensure they had a safe, warm home, full bellies, and a highly secure future. I had sacrificed my own social life to be present for every bedtime story, every fever, and every single school play. For Diane to use my innocent children as collateral damage in her desperate attempt to save face was an unforgivable sin. The gloves were officially off. I marched directly into the living room. Leo and Mia were still sitting happily on the sofa, completely safe, giggling loudly at their animated holiday movie. The apartment was spotless, smelling beautifully of fresh pine and the sweet pancakes we had made that morning. There was absolutely no filth, no neglect, and zero danger. There was just a mother who loved her children fiercely, and a grandmother who would burn them all to the ground just for a few sympathetic Facebook likes. I gripped my phone tightly, my mind rapidly shifting from defense to absolute offense. If Diane wanted a war involving legal authorities, I was more than equipped to deliver one. I began mentally cataloging every single piece of financial documentation I possessed that proved my high income, the kids' fully funded college accounts, and my flawless medical records. I would absolutely bury her in an irrefutable paper trail. Before I could take another step toward my home office to begin compiling the massive stack of evidence, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed loudly through the apartment. It was not the frantic pounding of my father from an hour ago. It was a measured, highly professional sound. I walked straight to the door and looked through the security peephole. Standing in my brightly lit hallway were two serious individuals wearing formal business attire, their official identification badges clipped clearly to their winter coats. They were agents from Child Protective Services. Diane had not just posted her vicious lies on the internet. She had made a false, anonymous emergency report. I opened the door fully, my posture straight, and my expression carefully composed. The two agents stood in the hallway, their faces a study in cautious neutrality. The lead agent, a woman with a no-nonsense clipboard and sharp eyes, introduced herself and stated their purpose. They had received an anonymous urgent report alleging severe neglect, hazardous living conditions, and potential child endangerment. The report claimed my children were currently locked in a filthy apartment surrounded by rotting food and garbage while I was out socializing. I did not act outraged. I did not act defensive. I stepped aside and invited them in. "Please," I said, my voice steady, "come see for yourselves." They stepped over the threshold, clearly bracing themselves for a scene of domestic squalor. Instead, they walked into a brightly lit, impeccably clean apartment. The faint scent of pine and maple syrup still lingered in the air. In the living room, Leo and Mia were sitting on a soft rug, happily engrossed in a colorful animated movie. They were wearing clean, matching holiday pajamas. On the low coffee table in front of them was a platter of freshly sliced strawberries, grapes, and cheddar cheese. Mia giggled at something on the screen, popping a grape into her mouth. Leo looked up, offered a shy smile to the strangers, and went back to his movie. The contrast between the malicious report and the reality of my home was so jarring that I saw the lead agent physically relax. The tension in her shoulders dropped, and the secondary agent, a younger man, offered me an apologetic half-smile. "As you can see," I said softly, leading them toward the dining area so we wouldn't disturb the kids. "The report you received was entirely fabricated." I didn't wait for them to ask questions. I operated the same way I did during a high-stakes corporate audit. I walked over to the small console table near the entryway and picked up a thick, meticulously organized binder I kept prepared for emergencies. I set it down on the dining table and opened it. "I am a forensic accountant," I explained, sliding the first set of documents toward the lead agent. "I deal in fax records and verifiable data. Here are the complete up-to-date pediatric and dental records for both Leo and Mia, showing they are perfectly healthy and fully vaccinated. Behind that, You will find statements from their school and preschool confirming their excellent attendance and well-adjusted behavior. The agents reviewed the paperwork in silence. I flipped to the next tab in the binder. The report apparently claimed I squandered their college funds to buy real estate and support a reckless lifestyle. Here are the current certified statements for their fully funded 529 college savings plans, which I contribute to monthly from my own salary. The property I purchased 5 years ago, Oakwood Holdings LLC, is a separate profitable asset that I manage. It has never impacted their financial security. The lead agent closed the binder, shaking her head slightly. Ms. Anderson, it is quite clear that this report was unfounded. Your home is safe, your children are well cared for, and your records are impeccable. I'm afraid there is one more thing you need to see, I said, my tone hardening just a fraction. To fully understand the context of this malicious report, I pulled out my smartphone, opened the security application, and played the high-definition Ring camera footage from earlier that afternoon. The agents watched as my father Richard pounded on my door, screaming obscenities and threatening to take my children away. The individual in that video is my father, I explained quietly. He was removed from the premises by the police just hours ago. Shortly after his arrest, my mother posted a defamatory essay on social media, making these exact allegations of neglect, and then presumably filed the anonymous report that brought you here today. This is a weaponized attack, pure retaliation, because I am legally evicting them from a property I own. The younger agent looked visibly disgusted. The lead agent sighed, a sound of profound professional weariness. Unfortunately, the system is sometimes abused in domestic disputes. We see this tactic used to intimidate and harass. She pulled a form from her clipboard and began filling it out with quick, decisive strokes. We are closing this investigation immediately, she stated, her voice returning to its professional cadence, though laced with clear sympathy. The allegations are entirely unsubstantiated. There is no evidence of neglect or endangerment. Your children are safe. She tore off a carbon copy of the official report and handed it to me. Keep this for your records. It documents that we found the home environment to be excellent and the claims to be false. If they attempt to weaponize our agency again, this clearance will be on file. They apologized for the intrusion, wished me a Merry Christmas, and quietly let themselves out. I locked the deadbolt behind them and leaned against the door. The paper in my hand was light, but it carried immense weight. It was official government-issued proof of my parents' malicious intent. They had tried to use the state to terrorize my children and destroy my life. I walked into the living room and sat on the floor between Leo and Mia. I pulled them close, breathing in the scent of their shampoo. They were my whole world, the reason I worked so hard, the reason I endured my family's toxicity for as long as I did. And Diane had tried to take them away from me. Evicting them from the mansion was no longer sufficient. Simply cutting them off financially was a half measure. They had shown me that as long as they had resources and a platform, they would try to hurt me and my children. They didn't just need to be removed from my property, they needed to be dismantled. They needed to be stripped of the facade that empowered them to act with such breathtaking cruelty. I kissed the top of Leo's head, stood up, and walked down the hall to my home office. I closed the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet space. I sat down at my computer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I was going to use every single forensic accounting skill I possessed to tear down their empire of lies. I opened a secure encrypted terminal and began running deep-level background checks on every single shell company, LLC, and holding trust associated with Richard's name. I sat in my home office, the glow of multiple monitors illuminating the dark room. The digital footprints were faint, buried under layers of complex corporate structuring, but my training as a forensic accountant allowed me to see the patterns. I was pulling property tax records, searching state corporate registries, and cross-referencing Richard's known associates. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became that the fake deed Jamal had used to secure his commercial loan was not an isolated incident of fraud. It was a symptom of a much larger systemic financial disease. I was running a background check on a specific Delaware-based LLC connected to my father when the sudden soft sound broke my concentration. It was a quiet, hesitant knock at my front door. I glanced at the digital clock on my primary monitor. It was exactly midnight. I pulled up the live feed from my exterior Ring camera. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was Jamal. He was no longer wearing the custom-tailored velvet tuxedo from his morning social media posts. He was dressed in a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked completely shattered. His posture was slumped, his shoulders drawn inward, and his face appeared hollow and exhausted. The arrogant, wealthy investment broker persona had been completely stripped away, leaving only a desperate, terrified man in its place. I hesitated for a moment, analyzing the risk, but the sheer defeat radiating from his body language told me he was not here to threaten or intimidate me. I walked down the hall, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. Jamal did not try to push past me. He did not raise his voice. He just stood there looking like a man who had lost everything. "Naomi," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I know it is late. I know you have absolutely no reason to help me, but I had nowhere else to go. I cannot go back to that house." I stepped aside, silently gesturing for him to enter. He walked into my apartment, looking around at the simple, quiet space as if he were seeing it for the very first time. I led him into the kitchen and poured him a glass of water, placing it on the counter in front of him. He gripped the glass with both hands, staring down at the granite surface. "I grew up in the South Side." Jamal began, his voice barely above a whisper. "My parents worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives. My dad was a mechanic and my mom cleaned houses. They worked themselves to the bone to put me through college. I was the first person in my family to ever get a degree. I built my brokerage firm from nothing. I worked 80-hour weeks. I hustled for every single client. I swore to myself that I would make it, that I would be successful enough to take care of my parents, so they would never have to work another day in their lives." He took a shaky breath, his eyes filling with unshed tears. "When I met B, I thought I had made it. I looked at your father, at that massive estate, at the cars and the country club memberships, and I was completely blinded. I wanted that life so badly that I ignored every single red flag. I wanted to be part of the old money club, and I let them play me for an absolute fool." I leaned against the counter, listening to his confession. I understood his vulnerability. Richard possessed an uncanny ability to identify exactly what people desired most and weaponize it against them. He had exploited my desire for family stability to get free rent. He had exploited Diane's obsession with social status to keep her compliant. And he had exploited Jamal's deeply rooted financial insecurities to use him as a pawn. He told me it was a test of trust. Jamal continued, his voice shaking with anger and profound regret. "Last month, Richard pulled me into his study. He poured me a glass of expensive scotch. He told me that he and Diane wanted to formally pass the torch to the next generation. He said he saw my potential, that I was the only one in the family with the financial acumen to truly manage their legacy. But he said that before he handed over the keys to the kingdom, he needed to know I was fully committed to the family enterprise." Jamal wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. He told me he needed a short-term bridge loan to finalize a massive commercial acquisition. He said his own capital was temporarily tied up in offshore trusts. He handed me that forged deed. He told me that if I used my firm to secure the $500,000 loan using the estate as collateral, he would immediately sign the property over to B and me as a reward for my loyalty. He promised the loan would be paid off in 60 days and we would own the mansion free and clear. Jamal looked up at me, the devastation complete. "He needed cash, Naomi. He is completely broke and he used me to steal $500,000 from a commercial bank. When the bank audits that collateral, when they realize the deed is fake, they are going to come after my firm. They are going to freeze my assets. The SEC will revoke my license. I am going to lose the business I built, and I am going to be indicted for federal bank fraud. I am the fall guy. He set me up to take the entire hit. The sheer audacity of my father's criminal scheme was staggering. He had orchestrated a complex financial fraud, intentionally structuring it so that his own son-in-law would face the federal prison sentence if the scheme collapsed. I looked at Jamal, assessing his state of mind. He was broken, but he was also angry. And a smart, angry man who has been betrayed is the most valuable asset in a forensic investigation. "Why are you telling me this, Jamal?" I asked, my voice calm and deliberate. "You know I am already evicting them. I have my own legal battles with Richard. What do you expect me to do?" Jamal stood up straight, wiping the remaining tears from his eyes. The terrified victim vanished, replaced by a man desperate for survival. He reached his hand deep into the front pocket of his gray hoodie. He pulled out his clenched fist and slowly opened his fingers. Resting in the center of his palm was a small silver USB drive. "Because I know what you do for a living, Naomi," Jamal said, his voice suddenly hard and resolute. "I know you are a forensic accountant, and I know you want to destroy him just as much as I do. Before I left the estate tonight, while Richard and Bea were fighting about your Instagram comment, I went into his study. I know the combination to his primary safe. I copied everything. Every ledger, every bank statement, every hidden file. I copied everything from Richard's home office safe before I left tonight." I took the silver USB drive from Jamal's trembling hand, its cool metal surface betraying nothing of the financial apocalypse it contained. The drive felt heavy, dense, with the secrets my father had spent half a decade burying. I pointed Jamal to the guest bedroom, told him to get some sleep, and locked the door behind him. The apartment was quiet again, the only sound the low hum of my custom-built workstation. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, cracked my knuckles, and plugged the drive into an encrypted port. This was my domain. This was where the lies stopped and the numbers spoke the absolute unforgiving truth. The drive opened, revealing a chaotic maze of nested folders, password-protected spreadsheets, and thousands of scanned PDF documents. Richard was old school. He kept meticulous records of his own crimes, arrogant enough to believe no one would ever be smart enough to find them or powerful enough to decode them. He was wrong. I initiated my forensic analysis software, a suite of programs designed to ingest massive data sets and identify anomalies. While the software processed the raw data, I opened the master ledger, a massive Excel file titled Legacy Holdings. I began to trace the flow of capital moving backward from the present day. The first thing that jumped out at me was the sheer volume of cash moving through Richard's accounts. For a man who had officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 5 years ago, his personal and corporate accounts were highly active. I tracked a series of wire transfers originating from a web of Delaware-based limited liability companies. These LLCs had generic names like Apex Management Solutions and Summit Capital Ventures. I ran background checks on the registered agents for these entities. They all led back to a single law firm in Chicago, a firm known for setting up anonymous corporate structures. I needed to see the source of the funds flowing into these shell companies. I cross-referenced the deposit records with a folder containing scanned investment contracts. My father wasn't just moving money around, he was actively soliciting investments from high-net-worth individuals promising exorbitant guaranteed returns on non-existent commercial real estate developments. He was using the glossy facade of the Oakwood estate, the very house I owned, to project an image of immense wealth and stability, luring in unsuspecting investors. The pattern was unmistakable. It was textbook. Richard would secure a large investment from a new client funnel, the money through one of his Delaware shell companies, and use a portion of those fresh funds to pay dividends to older investors, keeping them placated and convinced of his financial genius. The rest of the cash went straight into his pocket to fund his expensive suits, imported cigars, and the lavish lifestyle he demanded. He was running a classic high-stakes Ponzi scheme. But the most damning revelation was yet to come. A Ponzi scheme generates massive amounts of illicit cash, and that cash needs to be washed before it can be spent freely. I followed the outbound transfers from Richard's primary accounts, looking for the laundering mechanism. The money trail led me straight to a familiar name, B Beautiful Lifestyle LLC. I opened the folder containing B's corporate financials. The documents revealed a sophisticated, highly orchestrated money laundering operation. Richard wasn't just giving B an allowance. He was using her influencer brand as a washing machine for his dirty money. The mechanics were brutally simple. Richard would generate fake invoices from B's company for marketing and branding services, supposedly provided to his various shell corporations. These invoices were for exorbitant amounts: $50,000 for a single Instagram campaign, $100,000 for brand consultation. Richard would pay these fake invoices using the illicit funds from his Ponzi scheme. The money would enter B's corporate accounts as legitimate taxable income. B would then pay herself a massive salary, effectively transforming stolen investor funds into self-made influencer wealth. She used this laundered money to fund her designer wardrobe luxury vacations and the glamorous lifestyle she flaunted to her millions of followers. The generational wealth she bragged about was nothing more than stolen cash washed clean through her fraudulent company. And she knew. The email correspondence between Richard and B left no room for doubt. I found dozens of emails detailing the fake invoices, with B actively coordinating the amounts needed to cover her upcoming expenses. She was not a naive pawn. She was a willing, active co-conspirator in a federal crime, fully aware that her empire was built on fraud and tax evasion. She was helping our father steal from innocent investors to fund her fake, glamorous life. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating the sheer magnitude of their criminality. The financial puzzle was complete, and the picture it formed was devastating. They had spent years mocking my modest lifestyle, calling me a failure, while they lived like royalty on stolen money. They had tried to evict me from my own property, attempted to steal my children, and almost sent an innocent man to federal prison to protect their lies. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously compiling the evidence. I organized the fake invoices, the email correspondence, the bank statements, and the forged deed Jamal had provided. I created a comprehensive, undeniable dossier that detailed every single aspect of the Ponzi scheme and the money laundering operation. The evidence was bulletproof, ready for federal prosecution. I saved the final dossier onto a secure, encrypted drive. I had enough evidence to send both my father and my golden child sister to federal prison for a very long time. I glanced at the clock. It was 6 a.m. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting a pale, cold light through my office window. I compiled the dossier. I had enough to send both my father and sister to federal prison. The sun was fully up now, blindingly bright against the fresh snow outside my window. I locked my computer, unplugged the silver drive, and placed it securely back into my fireproof safe. The legal gears were already grinding forward regarding the eviction, but I knew my family would not simply pack their designer bags and leave quietly in the night. It was an undeniable reality. They were entirely dependent on public perception, and cornered narcissists will always attempt to rewrite the narrative rather than accept defeat. Sure enough, their strategic pivot happened less than 48 hours later. Realizing that my property ownership was an indisputable, legally binding fact, and that the 30-day eviction notice was currently being enforced by the county sheriff, Richard and B shifted their strategy from intimidation to elaborate manipulation. They could not beat me in a courtroom, so they decided to beat me in the court of public opinion. If they were going to be forced out of the mansion, they were going to spin the departure as a triumphant financial upgrade rather than a humiliating legal expulsion. On December 28th, an extravagant digital invitation appeared in my email inbox, simultaneously blasted across B's restored social media channels. It was an invitation to a massive New Year's Eve and deed signing gala to be held at the estate. The marketing spin was absolutely brilliant in its sheer delusion. The invitation proudly proclaimed that Richard and Diane were officially passing the torch of generational wealth. To cover the inconvenient fact of my public ownership, B's narrative claimed that her highly successful lifestyle brand was generating so much revenue that she and Jamal were formally buying the family estate directly from her older sister, keeping the real estate empire strictly within the bloodline. It was a breathtaking lie designed to save face with their elite social circle. They were going to throw one final opulent party on my dime in my house, pretending they were the victors purchasing a multi-million-dollar asset. They wanted to mask their incoming eviction as a voluntary celebratory transition of power, a grand maneuver to preserve their pristine reputation. The audacity of utilizing my residence for this particular charade was astounding, yet completely predictable for individuals who thrived on fabricated realities. The guest list for this grand masquerade was strategically engineered to maximize their social leverage and solidify the illusion of their immense success. They had invited the upper echelon of their country club acquaintances, several local politicians Richard had previously donated stolen money to, and a dozen high-net-worth investors Jamal had been courting for his brokerage firm. These were the exact same investors Jamal had unknowingly defrauded using the forged property deed. It was a spectacular recipe for an absolute disaster, and they were willfully marching straight into the center of it, with champagne flutes raised high. But the most manipulative additions to the guest list were Jamal's parents. They had flown in all the way from Georgia specifically for this event. They were hardworking, decent, blue-collar people who had sacrificed everything to put their son through college. They were bursting with pride, believing they were flying up to watch their successful son sign the deed to a historic, prestigious mansion. Richard and B were actively using Jamal's innocent parents as emotional props to legitimize their spectacular financial fraud. It disgusted me on a fundamental level, confirming exactly how morally bankrupt my father truly was. He cared for absolutely no one but himself. To pull off this theatrical performance, they needed one crucial prop: me. They needed the actual legal owner to show up, smile for the cameras, and validate their ridiculous narrative in front of the local elite. They needed me to play the role of the compliant, supportive sister, handing over the keys to the kingdom while suppressing my own grievances. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text message from B. The tone was completely devoid of her previous online hysteria. It was pure transactional manipulation wrapped in a thin veneer of sisterly compromise. Naomi, let us be adults about this. The public drama is bad for everyone's brand. Dad is willing to offer you $10,000 in cash. All you have to do is show up to the New Year's Eve gala, wear a nice dress, and sign a ceremonial piece of paper in front of the guests pretending you are selling us the house. You get your money, we get to save face, and you can officially kick us out the next day without ruining our reputation. Win-win. Let me know. I stared at the glowing screen. $10,000. They thought they could buy my complicity, my silence, and my dignity for $10,000 of stolen investor money. They honestly believed that after threatening to take my children, smearing my name across social media, and orchestrating a massive federal crime, I would put on a dress and play a supporting character in their fraudulent stage play. Their arrogance was a terminal disease, blinding them to the immense danger they were currently facing. They desperately wanted a show. They wanted a captive audience of politicians, investors, and family members to witness a grand transfer of power. They wanted the spotlight, the glamour, and the undisputed attention of the entire room to validate their hollow existence. They wanted to exit on their own twisted terms. I picked up my phone. My thumbs moved smoothly across the digital keyboard, crafting a response that sealed their absolute destruction. I did not negotiate. I did not express anger. I simply agreed to their terms while setting the stage for the greatest forensic audit presentation of my entire career. I typed my reply and pressed send. I will be there. Make sure the large smart TV in the main living room is turned on. I did not wait for the inevitable flurry of texts attempting to outline their conditions for my attendance. I turned my phone face down on the desk, leaving the screen dark. I needed absolute focus for the final phase of this operation. The New Year's Eve gala was scheduled for December 31st, just 3 days away. The 30-day eviction notice I had formally served to Richard on Christmas Day was a powerful opening move, but to execute the kind of absolute destruction I had planned, I needed the full weight of the legal system behind me. I could not simply walk into the estate and announce their crimes. I needed to arrive with the authority to enforce consequences immediately. Early the next morning, I drove downtown to meet with my attorney, David Mercer. David was a seasoned litigator who specialized in complex corporate fraud and aggressive real estate disputes. He had helped me structure Oakwood Holdings LLC 5 years ago and knew exactly how ruthless my father could be. I walked into his mahogany-paneled office and dropped a thick, meticulously organized binder onto his desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened the binder and laid out the entire sequence of events. First, I provided the certified copy of the 30-day eviction notice, accompanied by the police report detailing Richard's violent outburst at my apartment building. This established the clear timeline and the hostility of the tenants. Next, I presented the official clearance document from Child Protective Services, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Diane had filed a malicious, fabricated report attempting to weaponize a government agency against my children in retaliation for the eviction. David's eyes narrowed as he read the CPS report. Attacking a mother's fitness was a line even seasoned litigators found abhorrent. Then I delivered the killing blow. I pulled out a high-resolution color copy of the forged property deed Jamal had surrendered to me. I placed it side by side with the authentic county-stamped deed for Oakwood Holdings LLC. The forgery was sophisticated enough to fool a desperate investment broker, but to a trained legal eye, the inconsistencies in the notary stamp and the fabricated municipal seals were glaringly obvious. I explained exactly how Richard had used this forged document to manipulate Jamal into securing a $500,000 commercial loan to fund his failing Ponzi scheme. David leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. He realized immediately that we were no longer dealing with a simple landlord-tenant dispute or a messy family squabble. We were looking at multiple highly actionable federal felonies. He immediately picked up his phone and called his contact at the county sheriff's civil division. Given the clear evidence of ongoing criminal fraud occurring on the premises, combined with the expired eviction notice and the documented history of the tenant's violent behavior, David successfully argued for an expedited writ of possession. He secured a commitment from the sheriff's department to provide a full tactical escort for the formal eviction execution scheduled precisely for the night of the gala. With the local eviction protocol securely locked in place, I returned to my apartment to handle the federal component of the operation. Evicting my parents would leave them homeless, but it would not stop Richard from continuing to defraud investors, nor would it hold B accountable for laundering his stolen money. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, their ability to operate their criminal enterprise was permanently dismantled. I sat down at my forensic workstation and pulled up the encrypted dossier I had compiled from Jamal's USB drive. The file was a masterpiece of financial unraveling. It contained every fake invoice B had generated, every offshore transfer Richard had authorized, and a complete map of the shell companies they used to hide the stolen investor capital. I had meticulously cross-referenced the bank statements to prove the flow of illicit funds, creating a narrative so clear and irrefutable that a first-year law student could successfully prosecute the case. I opened a highly secure encrypted communication channel. I did not use a standard email client. I utilized the official whistleblower portals for both the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit and the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I uploaded the comprehensive dossier to both agencies simultaneously. I included a detailed cover letter summarizing the mechanics of the Ponzi scheme, the specific methods used for the tax evasion and money laundering, and the precise location where the primary suspects could be located on New Year's Eve. I clicked submit on both portals, watching the progress bars fill with a sense of profound, icy satisfaction. The data packets containing the absolute destruction of my family's fraudulent empire flew through the digital ether, landing directly on the desks of federal agents trained to dismantle exactly this kind of white-collar criminality. The trap was set, the authorities were mobilized, the final curtain call was officially scheduled. It was New Year's Eve. The winter sun had set, plunging the city into a deep, freezing darkness. I stood in my bedroom preparing for the gala. I did not wear a generic cocktail dress or attempt to blend into their high society aesthetic. I chose an outfit that projected absolute undeniable authority. I put on a stunning, razor-sharp emerald green suit. The tailoring was flawless, the lines clean and uncompromising. I paired it with a simple black silk blouse and sleek, commanding stilettos. I applied my makeup with clinical precision, highlighting the sharp angles of my cheekbones and the icy determination in my eyes. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant style, ensuring nothing would distract from the cold reality I was about to deliver. I clipped a small diamond lapel pin, a gift to myself after successfully passing my forensic accounting board exams, onto the collar of the emerald jacket. I picked up my briefcase containing the final copies of the eviction execution and the high-resolution files I planned to display. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I was not the quiet, accommodating sister anymore. I was not the exhausted single mother they viewed as an easy target. I was the architect of their total destruction. I picked up my car keys and walked out the door. It was time for the execution. The Oakwood estate was transformed into a breathtaking winter wonderland of excessive stolen wealth. Every surface gleamed under the meticulous care of hired decorators. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated smoothly through the grand ballroom, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported champagne and delicate portions of expensive beluga caviar. They moved with a silent grace that commanded absolute respect. A professional string quartet played a lively classical symphony in the corner, providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for the high society mingling taking place. The glittering chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the expensive evening wear of the assembled wealthy guests. It was a flawless, meticulously crafted illusion designed to deceive everyone present. Richard was in his absolute element tonight. He held court near the massive stone fireplace, standing at the very center of a captivated circle of local politicians, wealthy socialites, and the very investors Jamal had unwittingly lured into the trap. He projected an aura of invincible power and financial dominance. Wearing a bespoke black tuxedo, Richard held a thick Cuban cigar between his fingers, gesturing expansively as he regaled his audience with entirely fabricated tales of his unmatched real estate acumen. He boasted loudly about the enduring strength of generational wealth, positioning himself as a benevolent titan of industry who was graciously passing the torch to the next generation of visionaries. The crowd hung on his every syllable with rapt attention. He laughed frequently, a booming, arrogant sound that perfectly masked the absolute financial ruin he was actively trying to outrun. He was selling them empty air, and they were eagerly buying every single word. Across the expansive room, Bea was executing her own performance for a much larger digital audience. She had set up her smartphone on a portable ring light stand near the grand, sweeping staircase. She was broadcasting live to her hundreds of thousands of devoted followers, her face illuminated by the bright artificial glow of the halo light. She twirled elegantly in her designer maternity gown, panning the camera lens to capture the shining marble floors, the towering holiday decorations, and the bustling waitstaff. Her bright smile hid the dark reality of her complicity. She gushed endlessly about the beautiful manifestation of her dreams, crediting her relentless work ethic and positive mindset for this monumental milestone. She loudly proclaimed to her digital audience that this gorgeous mansion was the ultimate tangible proof that authentic lifestyle branding yields massive real-world results. She was harvesting their envy, using my property as the ultimate prop for her incredibly hollow brand. Tucked away in a shadowed, quiet corner of the grand room stood Jamal. The stark contrast between his wife's exuberant performance and his own physical state was incredibly jarring to witness. He was wedged tightly against a mahogany bookshelf, rigid as a board, sweating profusely through the collar of his expensive suit. His eyes darted nervously around the room, tracking the specific investors he had personally convinced to fund Richard's fraudulent bridge loan. Next to him stood his parents. They had flown in all the way from Georgia for this momentous occasion, wearing their absolute best Sunday clothes, their faces beaming with unspeakable pride. His father clapped Jamal heavily on the back, marveling aloud at the sheer scale and luxury of the estate, completely oblivious to the fact that his son was currently waiting for the federal government to crash the party. Jamal looked physically ill. He sipped a glass of plain, sparkling water with trembling hands, counting down the agonizing minutes until his entire life imploded in front of the people he loved most. He simply could not breathe. The tension radiating from him was palpable, a silent scream hidden securely in the shadows of the festive gala. Outside the estate, the crisp winter air bit sharply as I stepped out of my vehicle. I was flanked immediately by David Mercer, my high-powered attorney, and two imposing county sheriffs in full tactical uniform. We walked up the grand stone steps with deliberate synchronized precision. I adjusted the lapel of my emerald green suit, feeling the cool weight of the diamond pin. I was ready for war. I did not knock. I did not wait for a hired butler to announce my arrival. I pushed the heavy oak front doors open and stepped directly across the threshold, my stilettos clicking sharply against the imported marble floor. The grand entrance was completely flawless. The visual impact of my vibrant, structured suit alongside armed law enforcement instantly shattered the polished aesthetic of the black tie evening. The string quartet faltered immediately, the cellist missed a prominent note, and the classical music screeched to a complete, agonizing halt. The polite, wealthy chatter of the guests died away in a cascading wave of confusion, replaced by a suffocating, echoing silence. Hundreds of eyes turned simultaneously toward the grand entryway to stare at us. Bea froze mid-sentence on her live stream broadcast, her smartphone camera capturing the exact moment uniformed authorities entered her supposed new home. In his dark corner, Jamal closed his eyes and exhaled a long, shaky breath, knowing the execution he had helped engineer had finally arrived. Richard spotted the uniforms from across the room. The smug, arrogant smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a violent, ugly flush of deep purple rage. He shoved his way aggressively through the crowd of confused investors and politicians, marching directly toward the foyer with heavy, stomping steps. The expensive Cuban cigar was crushed completely inside his clenched fist. He stopped just inches away from me, completely ignoring the armed, uniformed law enforcement officers standing firmly at my side. He glared down at me, his chest heaving with furious, uncontrolled breaths, his voice a booming, echoing roar that filled the entirely silent ballroom. The sheer intensity of his hostile reaction startled the nearby guests. "What the hell is this, Naomi? We had a deal." He spat the furious accusation directly into my calm face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the man who had spent 34 years treating me like a disposable commodity. He was red-faced, furious, and completely terrified because he knew the control had finally permanently shifted. The armed law enforcement officers flanking me were a stark visual representation of his new reality. He could not intimidate me. He could not order me out of my own house. The rules of engagement had changed entirely. "Step aside, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the silent ballroom with icy precision. "You are interfering with a legal eviction process." I did not wait for his response. I walked right past him, the two county sheriffs moving smoothly with me, forming an impenetrable barrier. The crowd of wealthy guests parted instinctively, creating a wide path as I marched directly toward the center of the room. I aimed straight for the massive 80-inch smart television mounted on the wall. It was the same television Bea used every single day to monitor her social media engagement metrics and live streams. It was the centerpiece of her digital vanity, and I was about to use it to broadcast their destruction. I pulled a small high-speed casting device from my briefcase and plugged it directly into the side of the massive screen. My smartphone buzzed as the connection finalized. I tapped the screen sharing icon, and instantly the large television flickered to life. The high-definition display mirrored my phone perfectly. The entire ballroom, filled with the very people Richard and Bea were trying to impress, turned their collective attention to the glowing screen. The ambient chatter had completely died away, replaced by a tense, suffocating anticipation. I turned to face the crowd. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression composed and authoritative. "Good evening, everyone," I announced, projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the back of the massive room. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to this lovely celebration. However, since my father has gathered you all here tonight to celebrate the grand transfer of his generational wealth, I thought it would be highly educational to examine the actual paperwork." I tapped my phone screen. The first slide of my presentation appeared on the massive 80-inch display. It was a high-resolution county-certified property deed for the Oakwood estate. I used a digital laser pointer on my phone to highlight the crucial information. "This is the official recorded deed for the property you are currently standing inside," I explained calmly, holding the attention of every single investor and politician in the room. "As you can clearly read, the legal owner is Oakwood Holdings, LLC, and as the registered agent documentation confirms, I am the sole owner and managing director of Oakwood Holdings, LLC. My father Richard does not own this estate. He is a non-paying tenant whose lease I formally terminated on Christmas Day." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. The wealthy socialites exchanged bewildered, uncomfortable glances. The local politicians who had accepted Richard's campaign donations suddenly looked incredibly nervous. Bea, still standing by her ring light, dropped her smartphone. It clattered loudly against the marble floor, the live stream abruptly ending as the device shattered. She clamped her hands over her mouth, her carefully constructed glamorous facade completely dissolving into sheer panic. Diane let out a strangled theatrical gasp and grabbed the back of a velvet chair to steady herself. I did not give them a moment to recover. I swiped my finger across my phone screen, instantly loading the second slide onto the massive television. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice ringing out with forensic clarity, "the generational wealth my father has been boasting about all evening is entirely fictitious." The massive screen now displayed a highly detailed official federal court document. I highlighted the top section in bright yellow. "This is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing from exactly 5 years ago. My father's real estate empire completely collapsed due to toxic commercial debt. His assets were entirely liquidated to satisfy his creditors. He has been secretly bankrupt for half a decade. I purchased this estate to save my parents from homelessness, allowing them to live here rent-free to maintain their public dignity." The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. The wealthy investors, the men who had trusted Jamal and Richard with their capital, began whispering furiously to one another. The illusion of the untouchable real estate titan was dead. The man who had been smoking a Cuban cigar and holding court just 5 minutes ago was exposed as a broke, desperate fraud. Richard was hyperventilating, his hands opening and closing into tight fists, completely paralyzed by the sheer devastating magnitude of the public exposure. He was completely trapped. "But that is not the worst part," I announced, my voice dropping an octave, commanding absolute silence from the room. I looked directly at Jamal, who was still wedged into the shadowed corner with his terrified parents. I met his eyes, signaling that the execution phase was entering its final fatal stage. "Let's look at what Dad gave Jamal." I tapped my smartphone screen once more, and the image on the massive 80-inch television shifted again. This time I displayed a split screen. On the left was the authentic county-certified deed for Oakwood Holdings, LLC, that I had shown moments before. On the right was a high-resolution scan of the document Richard had handed to Jamal in his study. The differences were stark and undeniable when viewed side by side. I zoomed in on the notary stamps and the municipal seals. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the ballroom, "I direct your attention to the document on the right. This is a fraudulent deed manufactured entirely within the walls of this very estate. The notary stamp is a crude digital reproduction, and the county seal is a complete fabrication. I turned my focus directly to the group of high net worth investors who were standing near Jamal. These were seasoned financial professionals, men and women who understood the severe implications of what they were seeing. They were staring at the screen, their expressions hardening into masks of professional fury. My father, I continued, pointing directly at Richard, forged a legal property deed to trick his own son-in-law into securing a $500,000 commercial bridge loan. He did this to illegally extract capital to fund his failing, completely insolvent Ponzi scheme. I let the words hang in the air, watching them land like physical blows. He used the illusion of this estate and the misplaced trust of a young investment broker to defraud a commercial bank. The reaction was explosive. Several investors immediately reached for their phones, likely calling their legal counsel or freezing transactions. The local politicians who had previously been laughing at Richard's jokes were now physically backing away from him, desperately trying to create distance from a man who was publicly unraveling. Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. He lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. "It is a lie!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "She is insane. She is a bitter, jealous, psychotic woman who hacked into my files to destroy me because I cut her off." He was grasping at anything, throwing wild accusations into the void, hoping something would stick. But the evidence on the screen behind me was immutable. The facts were written in black and white, certified by the county, and displayed for his entire social circle to witness. Diane, entirely unequipped to handle this level of public humiliation, abandoned any pretense of elegance. She spotted a younger guest near the front who was openly recording the entire confrontation on their smartphone. Diane shrieked and lunged at the guest, wildly waving her arms and trying to cover the camera lens with her hands. "Stop recording. Turn that off right now. This is a private family matter," she screeched, her voice shrill and panicked. The guest simply stepped back, keeping the camera trained on the unfolding disaster, capturing Diane's desperate, flailing attempts at damage control. Near the grand staircase, B's situation was deteriorating even faster. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her in real time. Her carefully curated lifestyle brand, built entirely on the illusion of generational wealth, was not just damaged, it was completely annihilated. The sponsorships, the free luxury goods, the thousands of adoring followers, it was all gone. She gripped the banister, her knuckles white, and began to hyperventilate. She gasped for air, her chest heaving as the absolute destruction of her identity overwhelmed her. She wasn't an heiress. She was an accessory to a federal crime, and the entire internet was about to find out. The ballroom was descending into chaos. Shouting erupted from different corners as guests began demanding answers or moving swiftly toward the exits to escape the implosion. The two county sheriffs standing beside me remained impassive, their presence a solid wall of authority that prevented Richard from physically attacking me. "You are a monster, Naomi!" Richard bellowed over the noise, his voice hoarse from screaming. "You planned this. You came here tonight just to ruin us in front of our friends." "I came here," I replied, my voice slicing through his hysterical rant, "because you sent me a text offering me $10,000 of stolen investor money to play a supporting role in your financial fraud. I came here because you tried to use the state to take my children away from me." I took a step closer to him, the sheriffs moving with me. "You wanted an audience for your grand transfer of wealth, Dad. I simply provided the accurate paperwork." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. The sheer weight of the truth I had delivered left Richard completely speechless. He stood there, his mouth opening and closing, his face a vivid map of absolute defeat. The illusion was dead, and he was finally completely exposed. Suddenly, movement caught my eye. From the shadowed corner where he had been standing rigidly with his terrified parents, Jamal stepped away from the wall. His expression was no longer one of panic or submission. It was a mask of cold, determined fury. He ignored B's hyperventilating cries. He bypassed Richard's stunned silence. He walked slowly and deliberately through the parted crowd, heading straight toward the center of the room. Jamal's steps were measured, precise, and devoid of the nervous, sweat-soaked panic that had consumed him just minutes prior. He did not look at the investors. He did not acknowledge the politicians. He walked directly to where his parents were standing. They looked terrified, entirely bewildered by the sudden catastrophic turn of events in a world they had never truly understood. Jamal gently placed his hands on his mother's shoulders, whispering something quietly to her that made her nod, her eyes shining with unshed tears. His father stood tall beside him, a silent, unmovable pillar of blue-collar dignity, in a room full of crumbling white-collar fraud. Jamal turned around, positioning himself solidly alongside his parents. He was no longer the eager, accommodating son-in-law desperately trying to fit into an old money aesthetic. He was a man who had finally recognized the absolute worth of his own foundation. He looked directly at Bia, who was still gasping for air near the grand staircase. His expression was not angry. It was far worse. It was a look of complete, unadulterated disgust. "I grew up with absolutely nothing," Jamal announced, his voice steady and carrying easily across the silent ballroom. He gestured to the man and woman standing beside him. "My parents worked their fingers to the bone to give me a chance. They taught me the absolute value of hard work, of honesty, and of integrity. When I met you, B, I was so blinded by the glamour, the estate, the name, that I completely ignored the glaring fact that you and your father possess absolutely zero character." B tried to speak, stepping toward him, her hands reaching out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Jamal held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Do not," he commanded sharply. "You sat there night after night coordinating fake invoices and laundering stolen money while I was working 80-hour weeks trying to build a legitimate firm. You knew exactly what your father was doing. You knew he was using me. You and your father intentionally used me as a meat shield for your financial crimes. You handed me that forged deed knowing it would eventually send me to federal prison just so you could keep up your pathetic fake lifestyle on the internet." Richard attempted to interject, opening his mouth to bellow another threat, but the collective hostile glare of the investors in the room silenced him instantly. He was a cornered rat, completely surrounded by the people he had defrauded. "I wanted to be part of a legacy," Jamal continued, shaking his head slowly, his voice laced with profound realization. "But there is no legacy here. This entire family is nothing but a hollow, toxic lie built on the backs of the people you steal from and the people you manipulate." Jamal reached his hand deep into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The entire room watched in absolute stillness as he retrieved a thick, professionally folded document. It was not the fraudulent deed Richard had expected him to present to the crowd tonight. "I am not signing a fake deed today, B," Jamal stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He stepped forward and forcefully pressed the document directly into her trembling hands. "I am officially serving you divorce papers. The marriage is over. I am legally severing every single tie I have to you and this family's criminal enterprise." B stared down at the legal documents in her hands, her carefully constructed world finally permanently collapsing around her. The reality of her situation was absolute. She was losing her husband, her brand, her home, and her freedom, all in the span of 10 agonizing minutes. She let out a soft, broken wail and sank slowly to the marble floor, the divorce papers scattering around her. Jamal did not linger to watch her break down. He turned his attention sharply to the group of high-net-worth investors gathered near the fireplace. His posture was rigid, his expression grave but resolute. He was facing the professional execution he had dreaded, but he was doing it on his own terms. "To my investors in this room," Jamal addressed them clearly, maintaining direct eye contact, "I deeply apologize for the trust that was breached. However, I will not allow Richard to drag me down with him. Early this morning, I formally self-reported the fraudulent $500,000 commercial bridge loan directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I have fully cooperated with federal authorities. I have already handed over every single piece of internal communication, every email, and every text message, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard orchestrated the entire forgery and manipulated the loan process. The investors, recognizing the proactive protective measure Jamal had taken to mitigate their exposure, nodded slowly. They understood the gravity of his admission and the severe professional consequences he was willingly accepting to expose Richard's massive fraud. Jamal had thrown himself on the sword to stop the bleeding. A heavy, definitive silence settled over the grand ballroom. The devastating impact of the successive revelations hung thick in the air. The illusion of the Oakwood estate was completely dead. The generational wealth was a proven criminal lie. The golden child was exposed as a money laundering accessory. The patriarch was cornered, unmasked, and facing total ruin. The execution was flawlessly complete. Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic sound pierced the heavy silence of the estate. It started as a distant wail carrying sharply on the freezing winter wind. The sound grew rapidly, multiplying and amplifying as it echoed through the quiet, wealthy suburb. The high-pitched, urgent wail of multiple sirens tore through the night, growing louder and louder, until they stopped abruptly and decisively right outside the heavy iron gates of the Oakwood estate. The flashing red and blue police lights illuminated the grand arched windows of the ballroom, casting frantic, spinning shadows across the imported marble floors. The heavy oak front doors, which I had left ajar upon my entrance, were suddenly pushed wide open. A team of men and women wearing dark tactical jackets bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division marched into the foyer. They moved together with absolute terrifying purpose. They pushed their way forcefully past the stunned catering staff, entirely ignoring the trays of dropped champagne flutes that shattered loudly against the ground. The lead federal agent, a tall man with a stern, uncompromising expression, scanned the silent, terrified crowd until his eyes locked directly onto my father. The agent walked straight toward the center of the room, flanked by 4 heavily armed officers. The wealthy socialites and local politicians scrambled to get out of their way, pressing themselves flat against the mahogany bookshelves and the towering stone fireplace. Richard stood frozen, the color draining from his face, leaving him looking pale and very old. The reality of the federal dossier I had transmitted just hours ago was now standing right in front of him. Richard, the lead agent, announced, his voice echoing with governmental authority. "You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion." The agent reached to his belt, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. The sound of the metal clinking together broke the spell holding my father captive. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding any sense of logic or self-preservation. "Get your hands off me!" Richard roared, swatting aggressively at the federal agent. "Do you have any idea who I am? This is a complete misunderstanding. This is a setup. My daughter is a psychotic liar who fabricated those documents to steal my estate." He pointed a furious finger directly at me. "She is the one you should be arresting. She orchestrated this nightmare." The federal agent did not engage in the argument. He stepped forward to execute the arrest, but Richard violently shoved the agent in the chest. It was the worst possible decision he could have made. In a fraction of a second, the other 4 officers swarmed him. They grabbed my father by his expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo jacket, spun him around roughly, and threw him forcefully against the solid stone wall of the fireplace. The impact knocked the wind out of him, causing him to grunt in pain. The federal agents pinned his arms firmly behind his back, completely neutralizing his frantic struggling. The sharp, unmistakable ratcheting sound of the handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. Richard continued to thrash and kick, his face pressed uncomfortably against the cold stone, screaming hatred at me. He loudly cursed my name violently, vowing to destroy my life, roaring that I was an ungrateful monster who had ruined the family legacy. I stood perfectly still, watching the man who had tormented me for 34 years finally face the absolute, undeniable consequences of his own arrogance. The agents pulled him roughly away from the wall, read him his Miranda rights in a crisp, monotone voice, and marched him forcibly out the front doors. The great patriarch of the family was finally gone, dragged away in absolute disgrace. Right in front of the high society audience he had spent his entire life desperately trying to impress. The absolute silence that followed his forced departure was profound. The towering house of cards he had built was now destroyed forever. As the heavy, solid oak front doors slammed shut behind the federal agents and my disgraced father, a silence blanketed the grand ballroom. The remaining guests were paralyzed, staring at the empty space. Jamal and his parents quietly made their way toward the exit, leaving the wreckage behind them. Bee was still sitting on the marble floor amidst her scattered divorce papers, sobbing uncontrollably. It was in this silence that the sheriff stepped forward. He reached into his uniform pocket and retrieved the eviction execution. He walked with steps toward my mother Diane, who was leaning against a velvet chair, her face a mask of terror. He handed the document directly to her. "Ma'am," the sheriff stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "you and your daughter have 60 minutes to pack a single bag each and vacate the premises immediately. You are not permitted to remove any furniture, artwork, or assets. The property is now on legal lockdown, and my deputies will escort you to the property line when your time is up." The finality of the order broke through Diane's shock. She looked around the ballroom, realizing that every single thing she valued was gone. Her husband was headed to federal prison. Her golden child was facing divorce. She was being thrown out into the freezing night with nothing. The sheer panic overwhelmed her. Diane's knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her gown pooling around her. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, crawling directly toward where I stood. She reached out with her trembling, desperate hands, grasping tightly at the crisp hem of my emerald green trousers. Tears streamed rapidly down her ruined face. "Naomi, please!" Diane sobbed, her voice breaking into a pathetic wail. "Please, I am begging you, have mercy on us. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to survive? You cannot do this to your own mother. I will do anything you want. Please, Naomi, help us." I did not step back. I did not pull away. I stood perfectly tall, looking down at the woman who had watched her husband humiliate me just days prior. I looked down at the woman who had tried to weaponize the government to steal my innocent children. I met her tearful, pleading eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but the clean air of my own freedom. "No more babysitting, Mom." I stepped back, pulling the hem of my trousers from her frantic, grasping hands. I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand ballroom for the final time, leaving my mother sobbing on the cold marble floor as the sheriff stood over her with a ticking stopwatch. She had spent my entire existence making me feel remarkably small, incredibly inadequate, and completely invisible. Now she was finally facing the absolute unyielding reality of her own terrible decisions without any protective safety net. The execution was complete. The empire of lies had fallen. 6 months passed since that explosive New Year's Eve gala, and the fallout was absolute. The justice system moved slowly, but my forensic dossier was so airtight that federal prosecutors barely had to lift a finger. Richard took a plea deal to avoid spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. The man who once smoked imported cigars and looked down on the working class now wears a standard-issue uniform and cleans cafeteria tables for pennies an hour. He lost his freedom, his dignity, and the illusion of power he valued above all else. Diane did not fare much better. Without Richard's stolen funds and with the eviction fully executed, she was forced into a harsh, uncompromising reality. She currently lives in a cramped, poorly insulated one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. To pay her rent, she works as a receptionist at a local dry cleaning business. The woman who once draped herself in diamonds and sneered at my modest lifestyle now spends her days tagging other people's dirty laundry. She has attempted to contact me several times, sending letters filled with guilt trips and pleas for financial rescue. I return every single envelope unopened. Beatrice faced a uniquely modern destruction. Her glamorous lifestyle brand was completely incinerated overnight. When the Internal Revenue Service finished reviewing the fake invoices and the money laundering pipeline, they hit her with massive civil penalties and seized every asset she had purchased with the stolen money. She declared total bankruptcy. Her social media accounts were permanently deleted, erasing her hundreds of thousands of followers and the fake identity she had curated. Today, the former luxury influencer works a minimum wage retail job at a discount clothing store, handing over a massive percentage of every paycheck directly to the federal government to satisfy her tax fraud fines. She lives with Diane in that tiny apartment, trapped in a miserable cycle of shared resentment. Jamal, however, managed to survive the wreckage because he proactively self-reported the fraudulent commercial loan and provided the Securities and Exchange Commission with the internal communications, proving Richard orchestrated the crime. He avoided federal indictment. He lost several major investors and took a massive reputational hit, but he kept his license and his freedom. He finalized his divorce from B and is slowly methodically rebuilding his brokerage firm from the ground up, relying on the solid, honest work ethic his parents instilled in him. As for me, I secured the ultimate victory. I did not keep the Oakwood estate. The sprawling Tudor mansion was tainted by decades of toxic memories, manipulation, and financial abuse. A month after the eviction, I sold the entire property to a high-end commercial real estate developer who planned to level the structure and build luxury townhomes. The sale closed quickly, and I walked away with a multi-million-dollar profit. I took that clean, legitimate wealth and invested it directly into my children's future. I purchased a beautiful modern home in one of the most exclusive top-tier school districts in the state. Our new house does not have crystal chandeliers or a grand ballroom meant to impress strangers. Instead, it features a massive, secure backyard where Leo and Mia can run freely, a state-of-the-art security system, and large, energy-efficient windows that flood every room with natural light. It is a fortress of peace, completely inaccessible to the people who spent my entire life trying to tear me down. My forensic accounting firm is thriving, handling high-profile corporate audits, but my work hours are strictly managed. I no longer sacrifice my family time to fix other people's broken sinks. It is a quiet Sunday morning. The early summer sun streams through the large glass panes of my new kitchen, casting a warm golden glow across the pristine quartz countertops. I am wearing comfortable sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, standing at the stove, flipping buttermilk pancakes. The sweet smell of vanilla and melting butter fills the air. In the adjacent family room, Leo and Mia are laughing loudly, building a massive fortress out of couch cushions and blankets. They are safe, they are happy, and they are entirely protected from the generational trauma that once threatened to consume them. I slide a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate and pause, looking out the window at the vibrant green grass of my backyard. I take a deep, cleansing breath. I think back to that cold Christmas dinner, to the exact moment my father stood at the head of his stolen table and smugly announced that I was cut off. He thought he was delivering a fatal blow. He thought he was cementing my status as the family failure and securing his own twisted legacy. He was completely wrong. Being cut off by my toxic family was not a tragedy. It was the greatest gift they ever gave me. It was the catalyst I needed to stop playing their rigged game and destroy the board entirely. That cruel, humiliating Christmas announcement was the exact moment I finally found the strength to pick up the scalpel and cut the cancer out of my life forever. I pick up the plates of food, smiling as I walk toward my children, knowing my own future is finally completely and beautifully mine forever. The harrowing journey of Naomi serves as a powerful testament to the absolute necessity of establishing unbreakable boundaries, even with our own blood. Society often conditions us to believe that family ties are sacred and unconditional, demanding our endless forgiveness and relentless sacrifice regardless of how poorly we are treated or exploited. However, this story thoroughly shatters that toxic illusion. The central lesson we must draw from Naomi's experience is that walking away from an abusive family dynamic is never a tragedy. It is the ultimate act of self-love and self-preservation. For years, she endured endless belittlement, financial exploitation, and emotional manipulation, all while serving as the invisible pillar holding up her parents' fraudulent hollow empire. She was conditioned to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for her sanity, her skills, and her hard-earned resources. Yet the exact moment she recognized her own intrinsic value and permanently severed those toxic ties, she reclaimed her power and her future. We often fear that stepping away from our biological family will leave us isolated, unmoored, and vulnerable to the world. But as the narrative vividly demonstrates, removing the cancer of manipulation does not leave you empty. Instead, it clears the space necessary to build a life of genuine peace, authentic success, and profound safety for the next generation. True family is defined by mutual respect, unconditional support, and unyielding integrity, not by a shared last name or the expectation of endless silent compliance. Her ultimate triumph was not merely in exposing the financial fraud, but in refusing to let her identity be defined by people who actively sought to destroy her. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today, and find the courage to cut ties with anyone who consistently diminishes your worth.